Welcome to Eastmans Hunting Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Ike Eastman. Today's special guest is Larry Weishuhn. For those of you that have apparently been living under a rock, Larry Weishuhn is one of the staples in the hunting community, in the conservation community. He's sat on the board of Dallas Safari Club. He has had TV shows and lots of writing, and he's been in this since the early 70s. I sit down with Larry and we had an unbelievable conversation, not only about who Larry is, because he's been around for a long time, but also about conservation and what the difference between conservation and preservation is. You're gonna wanna know that answer so that when you're sitting at Christmas dinner with your crazy sister-in-law who thinks hunting is wrong, this is the answer you're gonna wanna give. We also talk about DSC and the changes that they're going through and having to move to Dallas, from Dallas to Atlanta, and why they did that, and that they're coming back. So let's sit down with Larry, talk about conservation, Larry Weishuhn, where he came from, and the history of wildlife in Texas. Hey folks, I hope you're enjoying today's episode. Today, this one is sponsored by Eberly Stock. Eberly Stock has been a partner of ours for a really long time. In fact, the founder, Glenn Eberly, is one of my personal friends, a great gentleman. If you don't know much about him, check out the podcast with Glenn Eberly. He is one of the most interesting men I've ever been around. Now, let's talk about Eberly Stock. They are a unique company. They were started from a cockpit of an airplane, and it was all about backpacks for not only backcountry hunters, but also for guys in the military. These backpacks are designed to be modular. That's what the mainframe is, my favorite backpack. You can add pieces to it, take pieces away like scabbards, top packs, side pockets, the whole 9 yards. The bino harness is one of my favorite pieces. You can add to it, you can add side pockets, you can add a rangefinder pocket, you can add a muff to put your hands in when you're glassing, all kinds of stuff. Plus it has that guarantee. They have a massive guarantee on all of their products, all their straps, buckles, zippers, everything. So check them out at eberlystock.com and make sure you tell them Ike sent you. Well, Larry, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us. We're in Dallas, which is a great escape for us because it's January and it's below zero where I'm from. Dallas Safari Club, my favorite show, and you've been with them for a long time. Before we get into that, though, I want to know about Larry. Like, where did you grow up? When did you grow up? Because you've been an icon in this industry long before I was here, with my grandfather, in fact. So you grew up in Texas?
I grew up in Texas. Our family's been here probably since about the late 1840s.
Wow. Pretty
much south of here quite a way, out west of Houston, just right on the edge of the Gulf Coast Prairie where the Colorado River runs on the north side of the gravel hills, and I grew up in the gravel hills. Grew up in the 50s out in the middle of a pretty good area where there wasn't anything close. Probably the closest town was about 12 miles or so. And we were in the cattle business, the chicken business, the hog business. And when I was a kid growing up, we had a whole bunch of cattle, a whole bunch of hogs, a whole bunch of chickens. I was the automatic waterer, and the automatic feeder, and all those other kind of things. But grew up in an outdoor situation to where I had a maternal granddad who unfortunately died when I was 9 years old, but he would come by every morning. He was a county commissioner, and he and I would go by. If it was any time when you could go fishing, we'd go dig earthworms and we'd go fishing. And if we weren't going fishing, we were going squirrel hunting. Now, we did deer hunt back then, but there just were not a whole lot of deer anywhere in Texas at that point.
Well, you were telling me before we got on the podcast, you were telling me about that, which I want to touch on. But
yes, sir.
So there wasn't a lot of deer, so you did a lot of fishing, but there wasn't a ton of hunting then.
Well, my dad ran coon hounds, and so we hunted coons at night with hounds, and then we had beagles as well, too. And where we grew up, there were a fair amount of little creeks and those kind of things. So we had both cottontails and what we call swamp rabbits, which is kind of souped up cottontail when you get right down to
really?
it. Yes.
It's not the same as a jackrabbit.
No, of course, the jackrabbit is a hare, and these are true rabbits, and they'll weigh probably 5, 6, 7 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So they're big. They ran like a fox, but like a rabbit. Whenever you jumped them, they'd make a huge circle. And so you ran after the hounds a little bit to kind of listen to them, but then you go back to right where you started from, and that rabbit would come right back through there. And back then we were shooting single shot 22s, and you got to be very lucky. You got to borrow your dad's or granddad's 12 gauge or 410 shotgun, but generally we were, this is a 22. You got to learn how to shoot running critters, son. And you better bring a rabbit home for every shot that you made too. So,
so back in those days, which one of the things that I didn't know until you and I started visiting is I always look at Texas as like this is a hunting state. Everybody hunts. It is a big thing down here. I didn't understand that. When you were a kid, hunting was a different deal. It wasn't a big game.
It wasn't really a big game. Back then, squirrel hunting was absolutely huge to the point where squirrel hunting almost had the same status as what white-tailed deer do now.
Really?
Mm-hmm. People would come out of the cities. They would set up hunting camps and have huge amount of people come in, and they'd hunt squirrels for like 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And people would kind of cycle in and out of some of those camps. They'd set up tents and trailers and all those other kind of things. But we did have deer. But if you were so fortunate as to see a deer during the hunting season, you were a local hero. Now, if you actually shot one, oh my God, you were carried around on a pedestal for the entire year kind of thing. But, things change. And with Texas, the biggest problem we had as far as the numbers of white-tailed deer that we had, and that included some of Louisiana, a little bit of Alabama, a little bit of Florida. It was a screwworm fly.
So before we get in that, I want to set the stage.
Okay.
Your background. So you grew up in Texas. You actually you have a wildlife background. Let's talk about, before we get into the science and all of that, let's talk about your background scholastically.
Oh no, let's not talk about the scholastic part. I'd almost get kicked out of college every fall, and then I'd have to work like crazy in the spring to bring my grades up. So
you were playing the game.
Oh God, like yes. To me, education changes, and education back then was important. I knew I wanted to be a wildlife biologist. The only way I could do that is get a degree, and I've got a degree at Texas A&M. But literally, I hated school. I mean, from the time I started grade school and until the time I got out of college, or at least my senior year, I felt like I'd died and gone to hell whenever school was going on.
Like, this is Dante's hell right here.
It kept me out of the woods. But I grew up hunting and fishing in an outdoor family. Both my mom and dad hunted, and Dad didn't fish a whole lot, but my granddad did, and a bunch of other kin folks kind of thing. But I was very fortunate to come along at the right time with a lot of different things. Timing is so very important in life, in hunting, but you have to take advantage of those situations sometimes. And in my instance, as a senior at Texas A&M University, I went to work with Dr. Mick Robinson and a guy named Rod Marburger. Rod worked for the state of Texas, and Mick was the head of the Wildlife Disease Project, which was a joint venture between Texas A&M Department of Veterinary Pathology and Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And I went to work for them as a student, learned more in 6 weeks of working with Dr. Mick Robinson than I did in 5 years in college. No, it took me 5 years because
you're like me. 7 years. A lot of people do 7 years. They're called doctors.
Not here.
Those called a lot of falls off.
But it was at the time frame when people were starting to think about white-tailed deer. And so we did a lot of the early nutrition research, did a lot of the early wildlife disease research there. And I spent about 7 years doing wildlife disease research, which a lot of times equated to looking at the nutrition, because a healthy animal, there's fewer disease problems. Now, there are a few things that come along, such as blue tongue or EHD and some of these other things we have. But it was a huge education because I got to spend time one-on-one with a bunch of different animals, raised desert bighorn sheep from the time they were lambs to the time we did research and released them. Did a lot of work with white-tailed deer, mule deer, and worked statewide. So I had the opportunity during those early years to spend a lot of times with with the biologist out in the field in different areas where we had potential problems. Then we also developed some of the first forensic work ever done on wildlife, to where if a warden called and he says, I found this hair, I'm not sure whether it's a rabbit or whether it's a deer, I found this blood. Can you tell us what it is? So I did a lot of that and worked as an expert witness for the Texas game wardens.
Wow.
And so we would spend a fair amount of time going to court, but most of the time we never went to court because I was the expert from Texas A&M University.
What you said, this is whitetail, the guy goes, I'm guilty.
and that's the way it was, you know. Every once in a while we had to do the whole thing, but most of the time if I just showed up and started messing around doing something, the guy would go, okay, you got me. You know?
Wow. So you grew up in like you said it perfectly, timing is everything.
Yes, sir.
You were on the forefront of when Texas became the wildlife state that it is now, because there's no other state that has more wildlife than Texas. Number one, landmass, but number two, the way that they manage it here is really unique.
It is, and that was a slow process because of those years going back when we didn't have a whole lot of deer. Now all of a sudden, we'll talk about later about the screwworm, now we've got a lot of deer. And so many of the ranchers, we're like 95 to 98% privately owned. Well, these old ranchers, for years, they've been protecting does. You're going to do what? Were you going to tell me to kill does? Right. You know, and the guy, yes, sir. You can't kill my cows. Mm-hmm. Well, it took almost a generational change to get that to where we started killing any number of antlerless deer. And that all occurred starting in the 1970s. People started realizing that the quality that they'd seen when there weren't a whole lot of deer, a lot of food available, and the deer got some age because they were few and far in between. And then all of a sudden you had a whole lot of it, you know, and so they go, man, we had a lot of big deer years ago. Now our deer are they're this big as compared to this. That's when we started looking at really some of the management techniques that we developed over those years.
So let's touch on that real quick, because I get this question a lot. Trophy hunting. Mm-hmm. Why, from a biologist background, why do you hunt the mature males versus, what's the difference between a doe hunt versus a mature buck hunt? How's that management style different?
The management style different is basically you take a percentage of the total deer herd each year, or you should, based upon fawn survival rate, range conditions, all these other kind of things. That to me, buck to doe ratio, all the long-term range potential, long-term objectives, and you look at all this kind of thing, and from that you determine what you're going to take. Then you have to decide, what am I going to take as far as age structure is concerned? And in addressing the bucks, whitetail deer in our part of the world, they mature at 4.5 years old. Okay. So within all the long bones are grown, the body's grown, now they can, whatever the nutrition not needed for maintenance, they can put in the antlers. And once they get to be at 5, 6, 7 years old, they have fulfilled their biological purpose of being there, which is reproduction. Kind of like the difference between your kids, my kids, and my grandkids. My grandkids are now at that productive age.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
past. Kids.
No, I'm not having new kids. So, you know, if I were a whitetail deer, I no longer served a purpose other than eating.
Yeah.
And that's taking food away from the rest of it. And there's X amount, in most instances, of course, habitat and vegetation are dynamic. They change from year to year. And in Texas is a thirsty state, so we depend a whole lot on rainfall. So you go back in, okay, now we got this range can support X number of deer. You know, how many bucks are you going to have? How many does you're going to have? What's your long-term objective? So then going into the trophy hunt side of things, to me, every animal is a trophy that I take, whether it's a doe or not. So that's kind of a nebulous term. But to me, I look at the maturity of the side of thing. And once that deer gets to be 5, 6, 7 years of age, he's fulfilled his biological everything. So you're dependent on those younger deer. So you want to maintain those younger herds, younger animals of the herd, more from a reproduction standpoint kind of thing. And then you determine the number of bucks that range can support and what the does that range can support. And then to me, you go in and decide, okay, we got to remove X number of does. There's a lot of things that go into determining the trophy side or the doe side is what you were mentioning, but that's a big part of it.
It's really interesting. So rolling back to whitetail deer in Texas, when you were a kid, it was rare. How did it go from rare in the
I'm not going to date you. You did.
No.
Rare in the 60s to prolific now. I mean, there's more white-tailed deer in this state than people probably.
Not quite, but I wish there were in some respects. We got a bunch of people that I wish would go back south of the border, and then that would go west of the border and east of the border.
Go back to the coast, please.
Exactly. Years ago, white-tailed deer, we've always had white-tailed deer from a historic perspective kind of thing. And the purpose of those deer and the value of those deer over the years changed from where basically it was food to now we're hunting, looking at antlers and all those other kind of things. But it changed back when years ago we talked about the screwworm. The screwworm was a fly whose larval stage ate flesh, live flesh. And what would happen is in most of our areas, they were very prominent during different early spring and then late summer kind of thing. So it was important that the fawns that were born at a certain time, because if those fawns had a scratch on them or when the navel cord dropped off, the flies would lay eggs. Those eggs those larvae would go in and they would literally eat the deer from the inside out. Mm-hmm. And if it scratched an antler in velvet, it would just about eat it up if you got a cut. So that greatly suppressed the deer population all over the state of Texas. And from an agricultural perspective, in terms of livestock and cattle, steer that's got screwworms is not going to grade very high. Yeah. And so it was more from the perspective of livestock that they did what they did. And what they did was they determined that a screwworm female fly breeds one time. So, and then lays eggs.
All you do is take that breeding option out.
Yes. So what they did is that they just learned about radiation, and so they produced screwworm flies by the billions, and to where they sterilized the male. And if females were there, that's fine; they were sterile too. But the wild population, if you will, so they sterilized the males, and then they would get little 152s, 172s, and about every 100 yards they would drop 400 or 500. Flies. Oh my gosh. And so basically
that's true science right there.
It is. They basically bred out of existence, kind of thing. And
so do they still exist here in Texas?
They do. They exist not in Texas. They exist in the far end of farther south part of Mexico, and occasionally we'll have a case that crops up in central Mexico, and they just drop a few more sterile flies there.
Get the 152, Cessna 152 out. We're going to drop some more radiated flies. That is really interesting, and you were on the forefront of all that.
That was done by one of our former governors, Governor Dolph Briscoe, and his cattle partner, which was Red Nunley. Okay. And they were the ones who financed it and figured out what was going on. This is during the 60s.
And it wasn't the deer that they were worried about.
No, they were not worried about the deer. They were worried about the cattle, the livestock, horses, sheep, goats, all that other kind of thing. The money. And at that time, Texas was still of the kind, there were a few deer leases, but landowners did not make much money off of the deer. And so they really didn't care about them because there weren't a lot of them. And there were, they let friends hunt, and there were a few people at least. Well, all of a sudden now we increased the population of the deer, and hunters at the same time started evolving to where, okay, there are a lot more hunting opportunities. Mm-hmm. So that's where the leasing system came in, to where they go, you want to come hunt my property? Yeah, okay. And it's going to cost you $50, whatever. Right. Of course, a little bit different now, but that's kind of where it kind of evolved into that, to where the deer population built up. And when all that started happening, that's again when we started looking at, okay, the quality has decreased in terms of antlers, in terms of body weights, and those kind of things. Okay, how do we move backwards to some extent without decreasing that population back to where it was initially, kind of thing. And so that's when we started looking at shooting does and what bucks do you shoot and what age do you shoot bucks and all those other kind of things.
So fast forwarding, you got your degree, working in wildlife biology. How did you become, or what was some of the steps that you took to become a staple in the outdoor industry? We were talking about this earlier. I mean, you knew my grandfather really well.
Yes. I know you do, Dad. Know your dad.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I only once that I can remember that my dad walked across, one of these big, I think we were at SHOT Show, and he walked across all these people and walked over and talked to them. I was like, holy God, I don't know what is happening, because he's an introvert, as you know.
No, I don't. Yeah.
But you guys have you share a lot of history.
We do, yes, sir.
So how did you get to, being a staple in the outdoor industry?
It goes back to being at the right place at the right time. All this stuff was really starting to develop. When you look at the whitetail industry, as far as I'm concerned, from a native perspective, it all really, years ago, Lenny Lee LaRue was a fabulous photographer. Mm-hmm. He owned the photography market in the magazines. Mm-hmm. The biggest deer that Lenny Lee LaRue had an opportunity to photograph was a 2-year-old deer.
Yeah.
Yes, because of where he photographed. A guy by the name of Jerry Smith, who turned out to be a fabulous photographer, got to spend time down on the King Ranch and started shooting photographs of what a mature deer could look like, or what a deer could look like if he matured in the presence of pretty decent nutrition. And they started showing up on the magazine covers. Or about the same time, John Wooders, who was from Texas also, John started writing about hunting mature deer, mm-hmm. as opposed to just going out and shooting a deer. And that started catching on, and then there was a whole lot of other people that became involved. But when you get right down to it, the actual start came from Jerry Smith and John Wooders, and that goes back to the early 70s. And about the same time, too, Biologist, Al Brothers and Murphy Ray wrote a book called Producing Quality Whitetail, mm-hmm. to where they looked at some of the things. This is the steps that you can take to improve the habitat, which in turn improves that population.
Which is really interesting that all these landowners, what did you say, Texas 98%
yes, sir.
Private, all these landowners over the last 50 years, it probably that 20-year period, they started jumping on board.
It did. It was a slow process. Again, we go back to some of the old time ranchers, and, by God, you didn't kill your cows.
Right.
And it took a generation change there. Some of them were open-minded. I'm not going to say that anything beyond that, but they were open-minded. So we'll try this. We'll shoot 1 or 2 does and see if we kill out all of our deer herd. Well, mm-hmm. they could have killed 100 deer off that place, and it wouldn't have affected them, to start with. But slowly, and then people became more interested in antlers, kind of thing. You had things like Texas Trophy Hunter come around, and then North American Whitetail started, as well, about a little bit later after all that. And people again started paying attention to antlers and age and nutrition, and then it just kind of built from there.
So how did they get, because one of the things that Texas is known for is the exotics. How did they go from, we're going to build whitetail, to, you know what, I'm going to go dump some black buck in here or whatever?
A lot of that goes back to World War I. There was an airplane ace named Eddie Rickenbacker.
Okay.
And he had a place just outside of Kerrville, between Kerrville and San Antonio. And he was absolutely loved in where he was when he spent time in because he became one of the officers that oversaw the reconstruction of of Germany. Well, they loved him, so they started sending critters over as a means of thank you. And then he started taking animals out of the zoo, and then from that's really kind of where it started. And then there were 2 or 3 other people on that same area that were very much involved during World War II. They'd spent time in Africa and mm-hmm. liked Africa, and then they found that they could buy these animals from the zoo, and they started stocking them as a secondary income kind of thing more than anything else, to let somebody come, well, we killed 2 white-tailed deer, but while he's here, if I get these exotics here, maybe he'll shoot another animal or so. Right. So that's kind of what was the birth of the exotic market.
That's interesting. Have you guys, has there been any downfall or any major problems by having the exotics?
Yes.
I actually thought about not asking you that question.
No,
you know what?
No, there really is. And wildlife conservation is the wise use of. It's right. Not the preservation. It's not the killing out. And to me, you look at it, and it's conservation. And to me, you can have X amount of mouths on a piece of property. Well, is it going to be white-tailed deer? Is it going to be sheep and goats? Is it going to be horses and cattle, mules, whatever, deer, exotics? And so then you have to properly go in and manage and say, okay, I'm going to have so many animal units on this property. And what's happened in a lot of these areas is deer, like the axis deer, they have the ability to eat browse or grass. So they'll eat browse until the browse is gone, and then they'll eat grass. Well, as a white-tailed deer, physiologically, really can't eat a whole lot of grass. They can eat it little green stages early on, but once that it's over with. So then it can go into a competition setup kind of thing. Just kind of like some of our West Texas country, where we now have a tremendous number of aoudad, and they were introduced from 1930s to 1950s, to where they compete directly with our desert bighorn sheep there, or with our mule deer as well out there as well too. So there is that competition when you get too many of those exotic species. And here in Texas, an exotic is talking about axis deer, fallow deer, black buck, all those kind of animals that are not indigenous. They're considered livestock. So when they're on your property, they're yours. They're no different than your horse or cow. You manage them how you want. Yeah, exactly.
And you touched on aoudad, which I know has become a problem.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out how to curb that, because they are competing with indigenous species.
Yes.
And it seems like you can't eradicate them, or at least hard to.
They're one of these animals that require, of course, they're from the Barbary Coast off the northern part of Africa. In their homeland, they may never even drink a drop of water.
Really?
They have the ability to pull enough water out of whatever vegetation there. Now, if the water is available, oh yes, they'll drink it. They'll wallow in it like an elk will too.
Really?
So, yeah, the males do sometimes. So they're a very hardy animal, and for the most part, not immune to diseases, but immune to some of the same diseases that affect our native wildlife. Kind of like the blue tongue thing, or EHD, which it's actually an Ebola virus is what it is.
Really?
And it destroys the capillaries. So and the animals actually a lot of times die of a pneumonia. Almost every animal, including us, have got various strains of pneumonia in our system. When our immune system is reduced, that's when those things kick in, and that's what that does. Even the lungs has a lot of capillaries and all that kind of stuff. Well, now all of a sudden the pneumonia can develop. So it's pneumonia a lot of times that kills rather than EHD or. We've got problems with that scattered all over. And now, talking about it, we've had the blue tongue or EHD, and that was responsible really for killing off desert bighorn. It was a disease that was brought over in the late 1800s with domestic sheep out of South Africa. And as they started moving sheep into some of these bighorn areas, particularly on the desert side of things, they carried that disease with them.
And it doesn't affect aoudad?
No.
Really?
Yeah.
No, so that's one of the struggles, is not only are the aoudad consuming the same forage as the bighorn sheep, but they're not immune, or they're immune to
several of the diseases that sheep, because they're really, was it Ammotragus lurgi or something like that. They're more akin probably to the tur than they are. Yeah. They're not really a sheep, they're not really a goat, and they fall into that tur kind of family.
So, I don't even know. We could go hours on this.
Yes, we could.
So, one of the problems that Texas is having right now is how to manage those aoudads, because the way I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, all of a sudden the aoudad became a species that Americans sought after. So the price of an aoudad went up. So now they're like, well, ranchers are like, well, I'm not going to kill them all. I want to manage them now because they're worth something.
But they're going in, rather than just having them, let them do whatever they want to. Now they are going in and managing those animals.
That's good.
That's helping. And of course, we're restricted in terms of desert bighorn habitat in Texas to a relatively small area out west of the Trans-Pecos. And our sheep program has done extremely well in spite of lots of different early setbacks that we had.
Yeah, that's interesting. We just did a film for my grandfather, documented a bunch of stuff, and one of the things was the California bighorn.
Right,
they bring him out of British Columbia and dumped him, and he just happened to be there taking photos of these 17 sheep that they put in an enclosure in Washington, and now it's, they're everywhere.
Right.
But it's the same type of thing. The sheep conservation is a really interesting story that someday I'm gonna dive in and do a long dive in how this all happened. The bighorn sheep to the California bighorns to everything that's happened in Canada with the Dall sheep and the fan and all of that.
Good.
But so how you were on the cusp of the big movement to get the desert bighorns back.
It started initially. We pretty much had lost every sheep in Texas, and we worked a deal prior to my time of trading turkeys for desert bighorn sheep with the state of Arizona.
Turkeys?
Turkeys, Rio Grande turkeys. And the original sheep came out of the Kofa Range, King of Arizona mine area. That's where our original sheep came from. Okay. And they set up a 600-acre by linear, not by this, on the Black Gap Wildlife Management area, and that's where they were released to initially. And then later we moved some sheep from there up to the Sierra Diablos area, just below the Arizona, New Mexico border. I'll get it right here in a minute. And so, and from those sheep have proliferated to where we've released them a lot of different places out in West Texas, and they're doing really well in certain areas.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So we're sitting at Dallas Safari Club, which you guys are terming DSC.
Yes, sir.
The new term is DSC.
Yes, sir.
Yep, DSC. So let's talk about your involvement with DSC and what DSC is doing, because the way I understand it is unique in conservation organizations, and it's not just Dallas. That's why we're moving to DSC versus Dallas, because it's a shtick.
Exactly, and it's not just safari.
Right.
DSC started, I think this is the 42nd or 43rd year of existence. Wow. It started years ago when Dallas was the top producing money-wise chapter of Safari Club. Okay. And they said, you got to give us all your money and then we'll decide where it goes. Mm. Well, we in Texas are pretty dadgum independent, and they said, no, that's not going to happen. So they separated from SCI and started like in 1982 or 81, I can't remember right now, started the Dallas Safari Club. And it's grown in a lot of different ways. And DSC is unique in several different ways. To me, we're here. Once you get out on the floor, you'll see it's an unbelievable show. But to me, what's even more unbelievable is the hospitality that is shown while you're here, and the hospitality that we do for our exhibitors. I got here this morning to hear. We do a breakfast every morning for our exhibitors, and to where they come in and it's as good a breakfast as you could find in Dallas, quite frankly. But the basis of DSC is we've got a relatively small staff. Corey Mason is our executive director. Brian Feinhold is director of operations. We've got like one or two other people that are in the headquarters building. Connor Harrison, who heads up the publication side of things. And then we've got 3 or 4 ladies that are in there, and then the rest of it is volunteers. This entire show, when you get right down to it, is put on by volunteers. We used to call it, I don't have my tag, we used to call it the DSC 100, because at one time there were 100 people that helped put the show together. Well, now we're up to about 700-800 wow. DSC 100. But the 100% now stands for the 100% heart dedication that you have to DSC. DSC is a worldwide organization. It's based in Dallas. It is not just for people who hunt Africa. The vast majority of our members probably will never hunt Africa, and a good portion of those really don't care about hunting Africa. They're deer hunters, mule deer hunters, squirrel hunters, bird hunters, but very dedicated to conservation. And again, going back to the wise use of wildlife and habitat kind of thing. We just started doing chapters across the nation, and I think I hate to say a number because I was visiting with Bruce Borowski. Bruce, I apologize. My lips are a little tight this morning. But Bruce heads up our chapter program, and he's doing just a wonderful job to where we have chapters throughout. Matter of fact, I met you guys at the Wyoming chapter, and as our parents.
Casper has a really good chapter.
Really good chapter. But we have numerous chapters now, and I want to say we're up to like 15 or 17 or something like that.
Hey there, fellow hunters and shooting enthusiasts. Are you tired of ear-ringing shots and the fear of permanently damaging your hearing? Nobody wants to be that old guy. Look no further than Silencer Central. These top-of-the-line silencers not only protect your hearing, but also allow for that second shot if needed. The target's not even spooked by the crack of the rifle. They also provide a ship-in barrel threading service, making the process easy and precise. Speaking of easy, don't let the paperwork process from the ATF deter you. Silencer Central makes it easy. They will walk you through the online forms over the phone. Upgrade your hunting game and protect your hearing with Silencer Central.
The unique thing of it that is with each year these guys have fundraisers, as y'all did up in Wyoming, and if you're a member of or a DSC chapter, the top fundraiser you have. Now you can have 20 fundraisers, but your top fundraiser, 5% of that total income, talking about net income,
right,
goes to DSC. 5%, and that's to help guys like Bruce and to travel across the country and to come see your chapter and all that kind of stuff. 20% goes to the DSC Foundation, which we have a DSC Foundation board that's separate from DSC. We are the granting arm of DSC, if you will. Our projects we get requests from all over the world, and each one of those requests is extremely vetted before we produce any money. 75% of it goes to the chapter to determine wherever they want to do with it. But also that 20% that they give to the DSC Foundation, they say, the chapter says, we want you to spend this money here, 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 here. So that 20% with the DSC Foundation, we simply are clearinghouse to where to send the money.
The national or the worldwide arm.
Yes.
We want to send
yes.
out of that 20%, we want to send 5% of that to rhinos.
Yeah, or X number of dollars, you know.
Yeah. And then the 75% stays with the chapter, and then the chapter determines what they're going to do with that
whatever
Casper, Wyoming.
Absolutely. Whatever they want to do with the 75% is totally up to the chapter. But then the 20% that they send to the foundation, if they go, we've got a sagebrush project, such as I know y'all are involved in. The sage-grouse, yeah. Your chapter can say that 20% that we sent DSC Foundation, we want it to go there.
We're not only going to spend our 75% here, but we want our 20% to go to that too, because that's a big thing.
So, and that's just for the top fundraiser that you have. So you can have numerous fundraisers, but only 5% of that goes to DSC proper. And again, that just simply goes to certain administrative costs of having Bruce on staff to help and produce publications and that kind of stuff that come back to the chapters. There's no other organizations out there in the wildlife side of things or in almost any other aspect of fundraising where that's the case. I don't know of any. We've looked. We can't find anybody that does that.
That's really interesting. So there's two things I want to touch on. Number one, wildlife conservation in like DSC is a perfect example of this. When the other side of that table is the anti-hunting organizations. They aren't putting money on the ground like DSC. They're not putting that 75% or that 20%. No. They're spending their money that somebody donates. They're spending that money on marketing. They're spending that money on lobbying.
And administrative cost and presidents and vice presidents and this staff and that staff.
Oh my gosh. And so DSC, that 20%, how much of that are you guys involved in Washington? What's that?
That portion, our three major goals are conservation, education, and advocacy. Okay. So we now have a young lady that's on staff and does a fantastic job for us in Washington. But actually, that money comes out of DSC, and it's basically her salary.
That's at 5%.
Well, no, that DSC and that's that 5%. Okay. Where the chapters help contribute. You know. And of course, our fundraisers here, we've got some great things going on here. A portion of that will go into making sure that she has the money to properly represent not only DSC, but hunters and fishermen and outdoor people in Washington.
So the majority of the money that is raised at chapter level is going right back to the ground and whatever is important to them.
To them, exactly.
Sage grouse in Wyoming, or if it's wolf problems in Wisconsin or Michigan or whatever that they're worried about. What is because one of the shticks, and you kind of touched on this, one of the shticks is it's all about safari, it's all about Africa, it's all about that, but it's really, you guys have spending, and I can't remember the number, but I read it in the annual report. The number of money that stays in the U.S. is insane.
Oh yeah,
a ton of
money. It's like 56 or almost 60% of it.
So you're really not a safari conservation.
No, have you ever looked at what safari is?
No. Let's talk about that. What does that mean?
It's a term that says an adventure. has nothing to do with where it
Africa.
came. Yeah,
It
came out. It's a Swahili term that means adventure.
It is. Yeah, I didn't know that.
It's Swahili. It means an adventure. It doesn't have anything to do, or it can be like a walkabout. You know, you hear about the Australians. Well, I went on a walk. That's a safari as well.
Holy
so unfortunately, it's just like the term trophy. You know, to me, just like, and I know you're the same way. I know so many other people. Everything that we take is a trophy because it has nothing to do with so much the size as what the memory that's here. Or that memory an accomplishment, and then that memory that you take to go sit around the campfire and tell your buddies and your family about that adventure that you were on.
Yeah, so it's a trophy safari.
That's
awesome. So what's DSC got coming down the pipe, and what has Larry got? I was teasing you because my dad. He didn't retire, he retreaded.
Yes.
And he asked me to ask you when you were going to retread. I said, I think he likes what he's doing. So what's DSC going to, what do they have coming down the pipe that an audience should be paying attention to?
The one thing that we need to bring out, we're leaving Dallas for a short period of time. The convention for years has been here in Dallas, and we love it here. Unfortunately, the K. Bailey Hutchison Center that we're in right now is being torn down very shortly after we leave here. They're going to, it's just going to come down, and they're going to rebuild it. Well, it's a 5-year plan to get it back up again. So during those 5 years, we were moving to Atlanta. And and the reason we're moving to Atlanta is because we could keep the same dates that we have. We have enough to where they allow us to bring in guns. They allow us to bring into the convention center.
Oh my gosh!
And it's one of the few places that we can do those things. So you're very limited, or even bringing in some of the mounts. You know that some of our exhibitors bring in.
Exotic stuff.
Yeah, some of those in some states you can't bring in. So
you're not going to have this in L.A.
No, gosh, no.
So that was one of the questions: is why Atlanta?
And that's it. We can have the same dates for 5 years, so it's always going to be the same time. It's going to be in the same place. Some of the other places that we looked at we could have it like every other year. At this time frame, usually the first part of January, and then the rest of the 2 other years in between, we'd have to go to July or August or whatever. And so Atlanta, when you got right down to it, we looked at. We've got a committee that's been working on this now for a while because we knew eventually they were going to tear it down. Didn't know it was going to happen quite as quickly. They've been looking for places and meeting with different cities and all that kind of stuff. Every place, you can't imagine all the places that were looked at. We actually have a whole bunch of folks here from Atlanta, Georgia, who are with every committee and seeing how things are done, so the transition will be a whole lot easier. So we're going to be in Dallas. I mean, Dallas is moving. Or DSC is moving to Atlanta. The convention is, not the headquarters, not anything else. But we're going to be there for 5 years. That's the one thing we want to bring. And the reason we're doing it is because we don't have a choice. And that is the best choice of the possibilities. And there was a handful of possibilities. And with all due respect to Michigan, Detroit was the other place. And thank you, Lord, that we're not going up there at this time of the year particularly.
Well, the Lions, but not eating downtown Detroit.
But from the other side of that, we're very much on the forefront of a lot of different issues, both nationally and internationally, in terms of, and our background is with biologists. Corey Mason's our executive director. Corey is a former biologist with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, very astute, very intelligent in terms of different policies in different organizations across the world, actually. And so hopefully in the next year or two, we'll continue to combine with a few more of those organizations as well, too, to where we can have more of a joint fight. And Corey's working very much on that. But we've got several things, that we have to look at here in the States with, and of course, the grizzly bear issue and the wolf issue and some of those kind of things that we're trying.
Lions in Colorado.
Absolutely. So we're very strong in that, and we'll continue doing so, and have our young lady up in Washington keeping an eye on what's going on up there as well too. So it's an everyday deal. There's never a day where there's, oh God, what are we going to do today? There's never a lot of things to do or have to get done.
I'm glad you explained why you moved to Atlanta, because I personally have filled
what the heck is
it's Dallas Safari
Yes.
Club, and they're going to Atlanta. I'm glad to understand that this
And that to me is
remodeled.
great.
So it's coming back.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 5 years. We're coming right back whatever this looks like now.
Yeah.
I mean, will look like in 5 years. Yes, sir.
That's awesome. So you're not moving headquarters.
No.
Man, that's going to be a challenge. 800 volunteers rolling into Atlanta just to keep this thing.
We're actually looking at meeting with a couple of the airlines to where we can charter flights from here to there to get
Fill
some
the whole
of
thing with the DSC members.
But we've also got a chapter in Atlanta and a couple other places there, and in Charleston, and those folks are already becoming very much ingrained. They brought some of their chapter members here to help with everything as well too, so they have a really good understanding. And
I have a fair amount of friends that exhibit here.
Yes.
And they exhibit at all the shows.
Yes.
You know, Salt Lake and Nashville and all the other shows. And this is their favorite show. They say nobody treats the exhibitors like Dallas.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Sometimes different groups forget the reason they have the show is because the exhibitors.
That's right.
If the exhibitors aren't here, there's going to be a huge empty space with no people.
Yeah, there's no reason for people like me to wander around the show looking for hunts or looking for, whatever. My wife's looking for a fur coat. There's no reason if the fur coat place is not there.
No, exactly. And I think in the aisles, I've forgotten the exact length, but I want to say it's almost 20 miles if you walked every aisle.
Feels like 20 miles. We do my crew does every aisle every year.
Well, I think the last time I looked, it was right at 21 miles if you walked every aisle here.
That's awesome. So you mentioned this before, preservation versus conservation. What do you mean by that?
Preservation kills, conservation creates life. Very simply. Conservation is the wise use of, and that includes the wise use of water, land, air, animals, and all the other influences involved. Yes, all the habitat. Preservation is if you have we hear a lot about prairie country. Well, let's preserve the prairie. The prairie becomes a monoculture. In a monoculture of vegetation, there are very few animals.
What do you mean by monoculture for us third graders?
For us third graders, it's like, okay, it's a solid pine forest that's an overstory where nothing hits the ground.
Okay.
So you've got a few birds and a few squirrels that live up in the treetops. There's nothing on the ground for anything else to eat.
See, I don't know.
Yeah.
Really?
So
conservation is the wise use of the resource.
It's the wise use of all the resources so that you manage that vegetation, what water is there, what animals are there. And I include to some extent the humans but with humans it's more of an education process to make them aware of all this. But you manage all those so that there is sufficient water, sufficient land, sufficient habitat for a great variety of animals, not just whatever one species. If we did away with all hunting in a time frame, depending on where you are, there'd probably be, for a while, a few snakes and probably be a few coyotes, and then after that, there may be a few insects left.
That is amazing. So when you talk about Africa, let's use Africa because that's one of the hot topics. If you got rid of hunting in whatever country, XYZ country, you got rid of hunting, over time, it would become a wasteland.
It very quickly will become, over time it will, but it happens very quickly depending on what the species that you have. Yeah. With elephants, I've been in some of these areas where years before there were unbelievable number of birds, every kind of little critter that you can imagine, every plains game animal, predators, and a few elephants. And then they went in and said, okay, no more elephant hunting in this area. Well, the elephant population increased. An elephant will walk up to the biggest tree out there, knock it over, and eat one limb out of it and go to the next one and knock it over. And in the process of that, they destroy the habitat such that I've been back in some of those areas, there are elephants there. They're no sable, they're no kudu, they're no gemsbok or whatever, impala, whatever the species are. Therefore, there are no predators. There are very few birds because there's not enough seed production there to keep the birds there. There's not enough vegetation there to keep the insects there so the birds can eat it and some of the others. So it just destroys. And so then it becomes almost like a monoculture of bare ground.
Because eventually even the elephants.
And then eventually the elephants starve off. Well, then you maybe in 1,000 years things start developing. Habitat in terms of vegetation recovers very slowly. Animal populations, because of their high reproductive rate, recovers very quickly. So that's one of the reasons we have to sometimes, where hunting comes into play.
Not only put a value on that animal so that it isn't poached, meaning killed illegally, but it also managing the species so that one of them doesn't get out of whack, like you were talking about.
Right.
Elephants get out of whack and affect all these other ones. That's what we're facing out west with wolves and grizzly bears. If they get out of whack, they're going to affect our ungulants, and they have.
It will. And there were periods, and I was going to just bring up the wolf situation. The wolf is, you hear about, well, they only kill for eating. No. Wolves kill for, they're
What they do.
They're worse than the most bloodthirsty human that ever walked on the face of the earth as far as killing is concerned. And it's going to knock out all those, but eventually there'll be a few wolves because they'll end up having to eat themselves in the long term because they've eaten everything else out there. Yeah. And so it's so sad to me to see this preservationist idea. I want to preserve it. I want to bring it back to what it was. Wildlife habitat is dynamic. It's ever-changing. It's ever-changing every day. And we cannot say, well, we got to take the human out of the equation. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to go in and just wipe out the human. Because directly and indirectly, what we affect the habitat and what we affect the animals. So you got to figure out if you're going to, that's where the wise use of comes in again, is taking advantage of what you have left and wisely managing it for the good, not only of those animals in that habitat, but for these people out here to enjoy visually or in their belly.
So what's in store for Larry Weishuhn in the near future? You got any cool projects? I heard you talked about a new website.
We've got a new website. I just started writing books again. And so anyway, I've got a new website. It's Larry Weishuhn, LarryWeishuhn.net. And we just brought it on. I just did 2 books. One's called Camp Talk that I did with Luke Clayton. The other one's called Deer Addictions, that I wrote about some of the deer hunting in North America. And I've got about 4 or 5 others that we're working on right now. And those are, yeah, some of them, yeah, really. And those are available there. I do a podcast called DSC's Campfires. It's a weekly podcast. It's on almost every place you go, but it'll be there, the weekly episodes. I do a little TV show, a little digital TV show with Luke Clayton and Jeff Rice called The Sportsman's Life. And it's a rather amateurishly produced TV show, and it's about hunting, it's about fishing, it's about the outdoors, it's about cooking the things that you catch and the things that you eat, and it's just a fun little show that Jeff produces for us.
Is that on YouTube? Or is that
it's on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel called Sportsman's Life, but it's also on Carbon TV, and then it'll also play in that website as well too. So we're trying to push as much traffic there as we can. Hunting always is going to play an important part as long as I can walk and crawl and that kind of thing. So we've got a good hunting season this past year, still doing some stuff, and we've got a bunch of plans for this fall and doing a fair amount of writing with the blogs. And then I just worked out a deal a couple of days ago with my internationalsportsman.com, which is a really cool website, and they've got like 1 million followers or something. But they came to me and says, is there any way you would consider letting us use some of your old original stories? And I go, yeah, I'd love to. Why? But yeah, I'd love to.
They're just sitting there.
And that's it. They are just sitting there. So, and we'll figure out a way to link that back to the website too. But they'll start here in about 2 weeks. We'll go back and one of the first article I sold, and that had a cover on, was in 1970, and it was about the Desert Bighorn sheep program that I was working with the blue tongue, and on the cover is some of the sheep from the Black Gap area. Wow. And I've still got it, and then I've got a bunch of others and so we're just getting
years of writing. You have written a couple words here and there.
Yeah,
that is amazing. And it's awesome to hear that you're doing books, because I think the books are, in my opinion, books are coming back because people. We went to a digital era where you read everything on your cell phone, but it's just distracting. There's no click off and get entrenched in something like a book.
Yeah.
there's no notifications, you're reading, and you're entrenched in it. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
So we're doing, and a lot of those are, some of it's new original writing. I did a book years ago called Pear Flat Philosophies, which was a short story type thing, all true. Little Wolfbane with Safari Press published it, and then I've done a whole bunch of others. But I'm doing these as kind of self-publishing. But I'm going to go back and do some of the short story stuff too, really based upon experiences. You never let, in some of those, you never let the whole truth get in the way of the story. But
my managing editor says that no good stories completely true.
So it's got, some of that's going to go back and looking at some of the experiences that I had, but also some of the experiences that were related to me in those years that I traveled statewide. I was usually traveling by myself, and so I got to spend a lot of time with old-time ranchers, old-time game wardens, old-time Texas Rangers, and I didn't have a recorder such as we do now, but I made notes. And so I'm going to go back and tell some of their stories as well too.
Wow, that'll be awesome.
And that to me is fun writing, and it's fun. To me, it's fun reading.
Yeah, that is awesome. So I ask my guests 3 questions, and one of them is, if you, God willing, you have the ability to be on your deathbed, and it doesn't happen like you get hit by the proverbial bus, but on a deathbed, what is Larry going to be thinking about on your deathbed?
Probably saying prayers for my family. I'm at this stage of my life, I've got 2 great grandkids, a little granddaughter called Ellie, and Graham is a little grandson. And it'll probably be praying that they have some of the opportunities that I had growing up, and to experience some of the things that I had. And just thanking the good Lord for the fact that He allowed me to do what I did. I've lived the most blessed life there is, and a lot of that, I almost said wife, I have. My wife and I have been married like 57 years at this point, and she's been a huge supporter. I would have never been able to do what I've been able to do if it not for her and her understanding. So all those things that kind of be coming into play, and just being thankful for the fact that I got to do what I did when I did, and the folks that I met, and the great people that I met, and hope again that my family that follows will have that opportunity, at least in some respects.
Well, you've left it. You've definitely left this state a better place than when you were growing up, because there was no deer, and now there's deer everywhere.
That's where we should be. We should always, whatever project you do, whether you should always try to make it a little bit better than it was that you dealt with.
So the other question, bringing back to that, is why does Larry Weishuhn hunt?
I am. I'm alive. I am. All of us, whether we deny it or not, are hunters. Some people hunt for bargains in a grocery store, in a clothing store. They hunt for other reasons. Some of us hunt animals. Those of us who hunt animals are very important in the fact that because we do, we pay for conservation, and those who even do not care about hunting and who deny that hunting is important, they benefit from all of our efforts.
I never thought about that. Everybody hunts.
Everybody hunts. Everybody hunts. I mean, it may be a book, it may be a story, it may be for a boyfriend, a girlfriend, whatever. But everybody, hunting is here. It's here, and it's between these 2 ears. And no matter how hard you deny that, it's there.
That's amazing. So TED Talk, we talked about a little bit of what a TED Talk is, a 4 to 7 minute speech that you would give to an audience, a random audience, something that you're passionate about. What would your TED Talk be on?
It would be about wildlife conservation and the role of hunting, and how important hunting is to not only the game species, but the non-game species. And looking back as a wildlife biologist, I was very fortunate to where I could take a piece of property that was horribly abused or nothing had ever been done to it, and to take a visual in terms of recording things as to the different species that were there, including the plants and including the birds, including those other kind of things. Then set that property up on a wildlife management program for white-tailed deer or turkey or whatever game species, mule deer, desert bighorn, Rocky Mountain bighorn, and set it up to where you're managing that habitat and those animals to try to improve the health of those animals, but also the habitat. And then after about 5 years, going back in and looking to see what has changed and how many different species you have now in terms of non-game species, songbirds, whatever. skinks, whatever, and looking at the vegetation and notice that there is a tremendous amount of variety now in terms of plants and in terms of animals as there was when she started that program as compared to when you started before you started it. Anything that we do for, whether it's elk management, whether it's deer management, whether it's turkey management, quail management, waterfowl management, anything that we do to increase the habitat or improve the habitat for those species, they benefit from it, but not to the extent of the non-game species. And they include the plants in that as well too.
So you've obviously done this. Is it typically 5 years it takes?
It depends on the property a lot. It depends on rainfall, or the area that you're in. There's some places that recoup or refurbish a whole lot quicker. But generally in terms of animals, you're looking at a minimum of 3 years to 5 years to get that herd into a situation where those animals grow up at an improved nutritional level.
So you're looking 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years, yeah. Yeah, generally.
Well, Harry, I appreciate this conversation. This has been fun. I've learned so much, not only about Texas, but I've learned a ton about, the 30,000-foot level of conservation versus preservation. I've learned a lot about you. I've learned about DSC, which is really important. It is my favorite non-profit organization, and I have a ton of them.
Oh yeah,
I like elk, and I like deer,
and we need
sheep.
and we need all of them.
Yeah.
I'm a life member in most of those.
Yeah.
But to me, I get tickled because I tell people DSC is my organization because of how much I dearly love it, because of what they do, and they do so very much than they ever get credit for. Yeah. We do things for the right reasons to get the job done. If we get recognition, okay. If not, it doesn't make any difference. It's getting that job done.
Well, I appreciate your time and sitting down with us. And
this has been a blast.
Yeah, well, and this is going to be the fun couple of days down here. We're going to the auction, and I got my kids coming down here, and we're going to walk around. We're going to book a African trip. This
fantastic!
It's going to be a lot of fun. So I appreciate everything you're doing, and keep up the good work. I can't wait to read the book.
And I appreciate you for what you guys are doing and what your family has done all these years. And I include Brandon and all those other guys that you deal with as part of that.
Team.
You have a great team, and I'm sure they're almost like a family. And
Yep.
I tell people all the time, if you come to Dallas or Atlanta next year for the DSC convention, it's like going to a family reunion.
100%.
It is that atmosphere where everyone in your family gets along.
That's right, which never happens.
It does here.
Well, thank you very much.
Ike, thank you so very much.